Hi, I'm Troy from Studio 33 Guitar. Thanks for watching. And today we're looking at the 6 chords that you need to play virtually any ACDC song. Now, if you're learning how to play guitar, and specifically rock guitar, you need to be able to play some ACDC. It's basically a rule. If you're going to play rock guitar, you need to know some ACDC. The great thing about ACDC songs is that the chords are fairly simple and pretty easy to play even for a beginner. Now, a lot of bands play just power chords, but ACDC does something with their chords that's a little bit different that really changed the way that rock guitar sounds. And today we're going to look at some of the chords that you probably already know, but we're going to make some slight changes to them to really make them sound like ACDC. I've also created a couple of ACDC style backing tracks that you can play along with the chords that we're going to look at today. I'll put the link in the description below for those tracks. One of them you heard me play along to in the intro, and they use the same chords that we're going to be looking at today. So make sure you check out those tracks after this lesson so you can practice playing these chords. This is going to be a series of videos looking at how to play ACDC, including some lessons that will teach specific songs. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. As you can see today, I am playing my Gibson SG. You don't have to have this kind of a guitar to play these chords or to even sound like ACDC. So grab whatever guitar you got, let's zoom in on the neck and have a look at how to play these 6 chords to sound like ACDC. The first ACDC style chord we're going to look at is a G chord, and that's going to sound like this. Now that looks very similar to a regular G major chord that you would play on an acoustic guitar. But let's just talk about some of the differences here. Typically for an acoustic G chord, you would have your middle finger on the 3rd fret here, your index finger on the next string down, and then you would have your ring finger and pinky up here. Now there's a couple different ways you can do this. Sometimes you'll have just your pinky finger holding this note down, or sometimes that'll be held down with the ring finger, or sometimes you'll have your ring finger up here and your pinky here. And that's typically how I would play a G major chord, would be with those 2 fingers down. And that's how I'll show it here for right now. Now, if you're to play that G major chord just like that, it would sound like this. And you can hear how that suddenly sounds kind of muddy. And all I did was change one note. So the reason that that chord sounds so muddy is that there's a lot going on. You've got all 6 strings that are ringing out. And particularly, you have these 2 lowest notes that are ringing, which causes those low frequencies to really sound muddy. So for an ACDC style G chord, we're going to remove this index finger. So we're not going to play this A string at all. So typically what we would do is put that middle finger down and then let it lay a little bit flat so that it mutes out that next string, that A string. From there, we're going to let this D string ring open and this G ring open. And then again, these 2 fingers are going to ring together. So now what we end up with is this. And again, compared to before, we had this. And so it's a small change, but it makes a pretty big difference in the sound of the chord, and it sounds a lot more open and a lot more rock and roll. Now, if you watch some videos of ACDC playing and you see the Young brothers, Malcolm Young and Angus Young playing, sometimes they'll play the G chord just like that I'm showing. Sometimes they'll play it a little bit differently. You might see it with that pinky finger off, and then this ring finger will actually lay a little bit flat to mute out that highest string. And so then you'd end up with this. So that's a pretty similar sound, but sometimes you want to get that highest note in there as well. It gives it just a little bit more high end and a little bit more clarity. And that'll depend on the song that you're playing, but that would work either way if you wanted to play it with that pinky finger down or without. The second chord we're going to look at is a C chord, and this is going to be very similar to a C add 9 chord if you were playing on an acoustic guitar. And if you've watched some of my other videos, you've heard me talk about the C add 9 chord. It looks exactly the same as a regular G major chord, except these 2 fingers both move down 1 string. So instead of being on the G note with the middle finger, you're going to be on the C note. And we're going to do the same trick. This index finger note is the one that's going to make it sound kind of muddy. So we're going to take that note out. And again, we're going to let that middle finger lay a little bit flat and block out that next string down. So that C chord now would sound like this. Now already with those two chords, you can sound a lot like ACDC just by alternating between those two chords. And that would be similar to You Shook Me All Night Long. And that sounds like this. So you can see how that's a really easy change, just to move that one finger up and down. The important thing is just to make sure you let that finger lay flat to block out that string directly below it. Now after I played those two chords, I went to a D chord next. So we're going to look at that one next. Now again, this one looks very similar to a regular D major chord that you would play. But now what we're going to do is we're going to eliminate this middle finger note. So we're going to be left with our index finger on the 2nd fret and then our ring finger on the 3rd fret, the next string down. And now for this chord, we're only going to be playing from the D string down. So we want to skip over the E string and the A string, and we're going to be playing just down through the rest of the strings. And again, this finger is going to rest against that highest string, so we're not going to play that either. Now sometimes you'll see guys play this wrapping their thumb around the top to try and mute out that E string and even mute out the A string if they can get it. Now for me, that's not very comfortable to be able to reach around. My thumb is not really long enough to really grab those strings very well. So I typically just try and miss those with the pick and just skip over them. But you can experiment with that if you think that you want to try and wrap the thumb around to grab those strings and just lightly hold them so that they don't ring out. You can try that as well. But otherwise, you just want to skip over those first couple of strings with your pick. And so with that D chord now would sound like this. Chord number 4 is going to be an E chord, and this again is going to look very similar to a regular E major chord, which would be like this. But again, if we play all 6 of those strings for that E major shape, it's going to sound a little bit muddy. So in order to give this chord more of the sound we're looking for, we're going to remove our index finger. Now it's really important for this one to make sure that you have this ring finger laying down to mute out that string that the index finger was on, because otherwise that's going to be an E minor chord. And we don't want that sound. So we want to make sure that this finger lays a little bit flat to mute out that string, and it'll give us more of this sound. So that's a nice big open sounding chord, and it's quite bright with these higher strings ringing out. Now sometimes ACDC songs will play an E chord a little bit differently. It'll be more like a traditional power chord. And for that, we're just going to be playing these lowest 3 strings. We're going to be playing these same notes where our middle finger and ring finger are, but we're going to be barring those with our index finger instead. And we're only going to be playing these lowest 3 strings. We're not playing these high strings. And that's going to give us a sound like this. Now that way of playing an E chord will be used in songs like Back in Black or TNT. And many others. And again, it's important for that E chord that you're just playing these lowest 3 strings, but you can also have your index finger resting against those other strings, so if you do accidentally hit them with your picking hand, they're not going to ring out. Now chord number 5 is going to be an A chord, and I just played that actually for that Back in Black example and TNT example, and that looks just like this E power chord, except now we're going to move our index finger down to the next string, and now we're going to be playing the A string and the next 2 strings, and that's going to sound like this. So again, for a song like Back in Black, you're playing that E chord to that D chord we learned to this A. Again, that sounds like this. Or for TNT, we're playing that E chord and we're going to this A chord, but in between we're going to play just this G note. So that would sound like this. And then back again. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is also very similar. Sounds like this. And for that, we're just playing this E chord to that G note and back to E again. Then we're going to the A chord, back to the E, and then the D chord back to the E. The last chord, the sixth one that we're going to look at, is a B chord. And this is also going to be basically a traditional power chord. It's going to sound like this. And for this one, it's going to be very similar to that A power chord, but now we're going to move the notes up on that same string up to here. Now, in order to hold that down, we're going to use our pinky finger to bar across those two notes. And then our index finger is now going to go up and play this B note. So we have these three notes, B, and then our pinky finger's holding down these two together. Now again, we're not playing this lowest string, so typically what I will do is use my index finger just to bump up against that E string just to keep that from ringing, and then my pinky finger here will rest against those higher strings to keep those from ringing. And that B chord can be found in songs like Thunderstruck. Now it sounds something like this. So those are the 6 chords that we wanted to look at, but I'll give you a bonus one here as well. For this A chord, you can do a little trick that sometimes they do in songs like It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll. And that sounds something like this. And you'll notice I did that in the intro and with the backing track that I was playing along with. And for that, what we're doing is hammering on from the open strings. So I'm still playing this A chord like I was before with just these 3 notes, the open A string, and then these 2 notes that my index finger is barring. But now what we're going to do is let these strings ring open first. And so we have that open A, and then these 2 strings open, and that gives you this. But that's going to be fairly quick, and then we're going to hammer down with this index finger to hold those 2 notes down. So in that intro riff, I was doing it like this. And then I was going to the G chord, and then to D. Make sure you check out the backing tracks. I put the link in the description below. You can play along using these same chords that we just learned, and you'll see the chords written out on the screen as they come up so you know which ones to play. There's also some more ACDC lessons coming up soon, so make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.